that in for us?
Sure, if you don't mind. Here we go. We'll play from start. There you are.
Ready?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
If you want, I can advance it. I don't know if
That
you
would be
wanna-
great.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you. I know we're talking about a heavy topic tonight. Sometimes I feel like in these moments we kind of need to just like remind ourselves to take a deep breath. So if you need to do that, and also there are still some really good looking cookies over there and some lemonade. Please go ahead and grab some if you just kind of need to shake things up a little bit before we get into the next segment here. You are welcome to do that. Awesome. Good. Sounds good. Well, my name is Jordan Pine. I'm the founder and CEO of Greenlight Operation, and we are a locally based nonprofit that works to strategically combat human trafficking. We do that through educational initiatives, legislative advocacy, as well as a restoration home that is soon to open that is just about 10 minutes down the road from here. For safety purposes, I'm not going to share exactly where it is, but if you're looking for some local ways to get involved, we have many volunteer opportunities through that realm. And so we can go ahead and go to the next slides here. So that's our mission statement right there. We'll jump to the next slide just to highlight those pillars of why we do what we do. You think about an issue like human trafficking, as you heard from Eric, we're dealing in the crime of slavery. This is unfortunately the fastest growing criminal industry worldwide. It is estimated that there are about 49.6 million victims of human trafficking throughout the world today. And we have to remember that when we're talking about these large numbers and statistics, these all represent people. These are real life people whose lives are being destroyed. They're being bought and sold against their will, and for some reason, less than 0.5% will ever be able to be removed from that trafficking situation, meaning that 99.5% remain in captivity. And we get that from data from recent trafficking in persons reports that are released by the State Department. Why is that? Well, as Greenlight Operation launched in 2018, we started to analyze some of this in central Pennsylvania. I'll back it up even just a little bit further. When I was first learning about human trafficking, I was young. I was actually in 7th or 8th grade, which you might be like, whoa, what kind of life did you have? Well, I grew up in a pastor's family, and in that, we had the opportunity to meet with missionaries that were coming off of the mission field, to hear about different stories and what was happening. And I will never forget 2 missionaries that spoke at a youth conference that I was at. And then they were at our home and sharing about their work. And they went on to talk about this issue that they were learning the term of called human trafficking. And in this village in India that they were serving in, there were families that were so impoverished that they would essentially have to choose a child that they would sell to the local trafficker. Those children then would be chained or sometimes even crated in the open marketplace. And it was a way that they were able to put food on the table for the remaining children at home. And I remember hearing that in 7th or 8th grade and just being astonished and thinking about how can a person ever choose a child in that way. Here I am, I'm used to having 3 meals a day and certainly not facing any type of hardship like that. And I was absolutely crushed. Fast forward a few years, I wanted to learn more about this issue of human trafficking. This was not something that was broadly talked about at that point in time. In fact, I remember being told that if I talked about it or got involved, that I would be trafficked as a young woman, and that this was a topic to not even consider getting involved with. And I kind of figured, well, challenge accepted. Because if nobody's going to do it, who's going to actually help individuals? Now, I was still under the misconception that this was only happening internationally, and it looked like that village in India. That was the picture that I had in my mind. So I went to Messiah University, and I decided, let's go ahead and study this a little bit more. But they don't really have, now they do actually, not necessarily at Messiah, but there are some universities around the nation that now have some fields of study involving human trafficking. But at that time, there was nothing when I was a student. And so I thought, okay, what could I study? How can I get involved? So I decided, let's study politics. And I minored in criminal justice. I wanted to learn how systems worked and government structures functioned so that we could go about it in a strategic way and in a holistic way of combating this issue. But I was still thinking international. So in 2015, I had the opportunity to go to Thessaloniki, Greece, where I served with the 821 campaign and some local missionaries that were there. My husband and I did a couple more trips out that way. And something significant about Thessaloniki, Greece is that it is considered a hub for human trafficking in Europe because it is upon the entry point when you enter the Schengen border, which is essentially Europe's border. And this is where a lot of distribution then takes place. And I'm thinking, all right, we found our place. This is where we're going to serve. And I will never forget being in the red light district, thinking, hey, we're doing this great work. This is awesome. Getting some hands-on experience in this. And being paired with a Greek national as we're walking the red light districts. And they were sharing you're kind of getting to know each other. And so I'm sharing some of my story. They're sharing theirs. And they went on to say, wait a minute, you're from Pennsylvania. And they started kind of like going through some cities. And I said, yeah, we're near Harrisburg, kind of starting big. And they said, Harrisburg. They were like, wait a minute, isn't there a place called Carlisle? I'm like, whoa, how do you know Carlisle? And he went on to say, he said, yeah, you're in an area that is a hot spot for human trafficking. He said, but the thing is, nobody's doing anything about it there. And I just remember being completely blown away. Here I am thinking I am doing all this good in the world. I'm international. This is my life's work. This is what I want to do. And here we are in our local community, and it is right under our noses, and we had no idea how prevalent it was. So I came back from that mission trip. Soon after, my husband became a pastor at that church that we were at, and we were serving and was just starting to feel this bubbling up more and more. How can we locally respond to the issue of human trafficking? And so in that time that was happening, we hosted an awareness event in partnership with the 821 campaign, which is their Walk for Freedom. Great event, but a challenge we received from some participants was, this was a great awareness event, but what's happening the other 364 days a year? I'm like, that is a very valid question. So again, we're going back to the table, trying to figure out what do we need to do. And so the pastors approached me and they said, all right, clearly this is an issue in our region. At that time as well, we had some cases come forward in our local church in Camp Hill. And these were cases that were happening in the young adult group as well. And I can share some of that story a little bit later. We had a prayer initiative happening where people were putting prayer requests into the offering plates. And I still actually have it taped on my mirror in my bedroom. And it says, when my people pray, ... and people were to fill out the card with their prayer requests that then got submitted, and the prayer team would pray over this. And it just simply says, I am a victim of human trafficking. I remember just getting that. They came to me with this, and they said, Jordan, do you know who this is? And what do we do about this? And of course, we're praying over this person. They didn't leave any name, number, and nothing. But it was just a simple reminder for us that people that are being trafficked are oftentimes doing life right alongside us. They might be in church with us. They may even work with us. They might be the neighbor next door or a student in our class. And unless we understand what to look for or what it is, we are not going to recognize this issue or get involved. And so that led to one of the first prongs of Greenlight Operation. And that was, we knew we needed to educate our community about human trafficking. The simple reality is, as I said, people will not get involved with an issue that they don't know exists. And this includes frontline workers even. So as we were launching Greenlight, we're meeting with as many people as we could to just understand, what is the anti-trafficking approach in the region? Police officers, how much training have you received on this? How many cases do you have? So on and so forth. And we kept getting met with, it's not happening here. It's not happening here. It's not happening here. But we knew it was because we were meeting the survivors or the victims that hadn't exited that life yet. We knew that it was here. So that, okay, we have got to educate about this so that people know what to look for and what it is. Our next solution that we quickly identified as well as we go to the next slide was legislative advocacy. Eric is a great example and has so many wonderful stories about the importance of legislation and policy. And for those who, again, my background is in politics, this is something for me. I used to work in state policy for a few years before Greenlight Operation launched. And something that's really unique in seeing the way that policy can work together in this field with these other initiatives is that what it does is it allows us to help change some of the structure and the constructs and even some of the roadblocks that we face in the field very often, where it might be, and you'll hear about some of the red tape that even the task force is faced with when we know that a survivor needs certain resources and boom, we've got some red tape that's in the way. Or we have situations where, like Eric was saying, we have these traffickers that are getting apprehended time and time again, but they're just like, you know what? This is just a cost of business. These fines are nothing because look at how much money we're generating. And so with that, we knew we have got to change the system that is broken. And we can do that by partnering education and training people up on what these policies that need to change are, working with some of our legislators and building that relationship. And being tactful about that. We're a 501c3. We do not campaign or endorse any candidates, but what we can do is we can advocate on policies and we can educate legislators on the impact of the policies that they are promoting. And then the final piece. I say final, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have some more stuff coming up here soon, wink, wink. But the other piece is the restoration home. We knew that as we were launching into the education and legislative advocacy, a natural result is just like, what is it, the white Volvo scenario where somebody says the white Volvo, that's the only car you're gonna see as you're driving home and for the next few days. You're gonna see that on the road all the time. When you know what to look for with human trafficking, it's very similar. You see it and you recognize it. And so we knew more cases would start to get reported. And as a result, where are the survivors going for help and assistance? Here is the dark reality. Right now, and I know we're like, oh no, who's sharing what and everything else? I will let these guys share some of the specific needs that are being faced in Dauphin County specifically. But what I can tell you is that the cases are very high. There are many people who are being identified, especially as a result of the education that the Dauphin County Human Trafficking Task Force has implemented with frontline workers, which is very unique, by the way. Not all counties do that. And we are seeing the direct results of that hard work and labor over the past few years, since 2020 when the task force launched, to where they are now. The number of cases that are being identified are far higher than many counties. And so sometimes we look at the Pennsylvania court system documents and we see the counties that have a lot of cases of human trafficking. And yes, there might be a higher concentration, but we also have to consider, are those the counties that are actually part of the solution and that are calling it out and helping it get identified? Because if we choose to look the other way and we're like, well, it's not there, you're not gonna see it, or it's not gonna get reported. And there are a lot of counties that are doing that right now. They wanna keep their head in the sand and pretend it's not there. But the more we ask questions as a community, the more we dive into that, the more individuals, and again, going back to the numbers, these numbers are people. These are lives. And so these are people then that can be identified and the community can collectively work together on solutions. For Greenlight Operation, one of those solutions was a restoration home. When we were looking at what services exist in our area, we noticed that housing was a major barrier, especially transitional housing. So we're in the process of launching this restoration home, and we can jump to the next slide. And it's more than just a house. This is about a 12 to 18-month program where survivors of human trafficking, and we're going to be specifically working with women who've been sexually exploited through human trafficking. And again, this impacts men, women, and children, but based on the demographic and the need in our region, this is our current target of who we're housing at the restoration home. And while they're there, survivors will have the opportunity to go through trauma-informed therapy. They're going to have individualized case management. They'll go through life skills coaching, as well as opportunities to get the medical and dental care that they need. And then they're also going to have that opportunity while they're stabilizing and moving through that phase of, wow, I'm actually being treated like a human being again. And I'm not in survival mode anymore. Tomorrow, I can actually think about tomorrow because I don't have to think about the consequences of the trafficker because I didn't meet my quota or, didn't make them happy. And because we're able to remove them from that survival mode, they can start to dream. They can start to consider a new life. And so we want to partner with them in that. And we have a lot of wonderful volunteers and staff who are coming alongside them and helping to coach and provide that opportunity to allow survivors to live a renewed life where they can then thrive. And so this includes opportunities for ongoing education, going through career and coaching curriculum, and while they're in our restorative care program, they will be employed and have opportunities to start earning an income so that we're not then saying, hey, congratulations, you've graduated, but then it's like, well, where do I go? Where's the next job? And where am I going to live? But we're going to be building those blocks for them and helping and working with them in that till they get to a stage of independence and can live independently. And then we can do warm handoffs with groups like Amy's, with Hope Inspire Love, that you'll hear more of their services and what they offer. But that's a beautiful piece about when you're able to trust and work with others in the field as well, you're able to help ensure that people are not slipping through the cracks and they're able to get that care that they desperately need. The reality is if a survivor does not receive some form of restorative care services, they will go back to the life of exploitation. One of the studies that Eric was referencing, the Survivor Institute, the Institute for Survivor Care, recently did a study of 189 survivors who were willing to complete a survey. In that's where we saw some things like moms are becoming one of the first traffickers that were noted within this particular study that was just released yesterday, actually. But we also saw that some of the major barriers that stand in the way are things like employment, not having a job. And for many, the number of them that didn't feel like they had a proper support to leave, the average length of exploitation for these 189 survivors who completed the survey was about 14 years. They remained in this trafficking situation for about 14 years. And one of the major reasons was that they didn't see a way forward for themselves. They didn't feel that there were enough support systems in place to aid them in the next stage of their life. And when we think about that for a moment, what is a survivor going through? Why would they remain in captivity? We can jump to the next slide. I'll get to that in just a little bit. Can we jump ahead to where it talks about what prevents a survivor from reaching out for help, and then we'll go back into some of these other ones if time allows. Here we go. So what prevents them from reaching out for help? Why would a person, and we get asked that a lot, if they're going to school, if they're going to church, if they're in everyday life, why aren't they telling a person nearby, hey, I'm being trafficked? Well, the simple reality for many is they don't recognize that what's happening to them is human trafficking. If you tonight didn't know what human trafficking was, why would a person who's being exploited know the term for that or know what's going on to them? They know they're in a dangerous situation, but do they recognize that what's happening to them is that they're being trafficked or that they have opportunities to leave? But especially if that person's become dependent upon their trafficker for basic needs like food and shelter and all sorts of things like that, they're going to leave a major support behind then. And then if they're looking at what are the services that I'm able to utilize or where's the help that I can get, and they're like, well, there are none. I'm going to be homeless and I'm going to be hungry and my family's not involved. I don't have any support system anymore. But at least with a trafficker, I'm getting some food. I have a little bit of shelter. Is it a good life? No. But if leaving is worse, we have a major problem. And that's what a lot of survivors are seeing. There's, of course, threats and abuse. And on the next slide, you'll see threats of a loved one being harmed, induced drug addiction, Many, many survivors are addicted to substances because they're trying to numb the pain of what is going on. And it's a control technique that traffickers can use. It's quite literally called the leash by traffickers. And they will use that as even a reward and punishment system. They may distrust police and authority figures. Here's something to consider. There was a shelter up north that we had connected with, and they had a case of trafficking, and we're working with a woman, and she was sharing some of her story with them, and that she was what they call the track, where she would go to, where she was forced to then service individuals at a local hotel. She would walk by a police station every single night. And I said, well, why didn't you ever run into the police station and make a report or tell them what was happening? Why didn't you just break loose and go? And she said, well, I couldn't because half of them in there were my clients. The piece we have to think about too is who is buying into this. Human trafficking functions on basic economics, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking. It's the buying and selling of human beings, and if there is a demand for it, a trafficker will certainly find a way to supply it. Because unlike other goods and substances, a human can be used over and over and over again. And so those that are dealing in organized crime or criminal enterprises, a lot of them are changing what they typically deal in and starting to work in human trafficking, because to them, they're like, well, this is low risk and high reward. There are others, though, too, that may be trafficked by a family member, or they're trafficked online, and it's a one-off case. There are a lot of layers to this. It's like an onion. You may walk out tonight and have more questions than answers, and that's actually pretty good, because here's what I would encourage you. Keep learning after today. Keep pressing into that. So again, as we consider that, what is preventing a person from getting help? These are just some of those considerations. We can go back to that trauma-informed approach screen. And here's something that Greenlight Operation is committed to, and I know that the women at this table are committed to as well. You hear trauma-informed approach, it's kind of like a buzz term that's getting thrown around a lot, but what does that really mean? Well, I'll tell you for Greenlight, this is what this means. It means that we are engaging, sorry, I have students, we're engaging the individual, we're engaging the survivor in the greatest possible extent of their treatment. We're giving them choice. We're letting them choose. Do you want to go to a shelter? Do you want to stay with your trafficker? That's a really hard one. Everything in us wants to help them be removed from that. But if they're saying, no, I don't want to, and we're forcing them to, we're removing their choice. We're now forcing them to do something they don't want to do, and they've had enough of that. The hard part is letting them choose, and sometimes they're not going to choose what is best either. But always showing up, being consistent, showing that you love and you care for them, that helps to break down some of those barriers. And we want to prioritize the safety and trust throughout the entire process and reduce the likelihood that we're going to re-traumatize this person in that process. And so we can jump to the next screen, and we'll go one more over. Just quickly to help you understand too, you might be wondering, okay, we're hearing about these survivors, we're hearing about why they stay in captivity, and also why we need to care about this and the need for education, but how do they get to the point of being exploited? Traffickers are master manipulators. Whether they realize it or not, they are essentially kind of knocking on the layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And they're looking to see, does this individual need housing? Do they, in shelter, do they need a sense of belonging? Are they looking for some type of, are they lonely? What type of need does that person have? And they're going to try to fulfill that. What helps them is they're going to target vulnerabilities, and they're looking for the window of vulnerability in a person's life. Some of the top risk factors that have been identified by the National Human Trafficking Hotline are listed here on the screen, but these could be things like runaway youth, somebody who utilizes substances, or a caregiver uses substances. This could be unstable housing, poverty, mental health concerns. The list goes on and on. It's not an exclusive list, but we have to consider vulnerabilities, and a trafficker will prey upon that. That substance abuse piece is one that always gets me. One of my first cases that I was exposed to as I was learning in the field and volunteering and really starting to test the waters in this. involved a woman who was in her mid-20s. And she went on to share that her story of trafficking started when she was 8 years old. And her very first trafficker was her mom. Mom had a horrific drug addiction, wanted to get that next fix, and was willing to go to any length to do that and to pay off her dealers. So this girl was going to school every single day, but every day when she would get off the bus, she would step into the home. Mom had a menu of sex acts that men typically who were coming could choose from. They would select what sex act they wanted. There was a price right next to that, and they'd have their way with this 8-year-old child. She was in school the next day. And this continued all throughout her adolescence. So as she aged, she then sought relationships that mirrored that. And so, mom was her first trafficker, but then she sought boyfriends that mimicked that type of relationship. And so then the boyfriends were her trafficker, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until her mid-20s that something finally clicked and she realized, I don't have to live this way. There are others who aren't living this way. How can that be my life? How can I make that happen? And she finally was able to reach out for some help and get that. But again, it was a person who was in everyday life. She was going to the grocery store. She wasn't locked away or chained up. But she was a child, and again, it wasn't until her 20s that she finally got the help she needed. So we can go to the next slide. I talk about traffickers as master manipulators. They're obviously they're gonna target that person. They're looking for somebody who often doesn't have a lot of support around them, or if the person does have a support system, their goal is to become the center of that person's world, to isolate that person as much as possible so they don't have anybody to turn to, whether that's through a romantic relationship, through the promise of a good job, or whatever that might be. And then they're gonna isolate them, and then that's when the exploitation begins. And it might be things like, kind of starts out with, well, how do you go from a relationship or connection or dynamic with a person? I'll use a sex trafficking example. It could very simply be a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and hey, it's a pretty normal relationship. Naturally, in a romantic relationship, that partner becomes the center of your world, and you start to connect the most with them, and others kind of start going to the sidelines. And so let's use that as an example. And they suddenly hit hard times, and I have rent that I have to pay and utility bills or whatever it might be. And then it's, well, how are we going to do this? We don't have any other form of income. And they kind of help make that person almost choose to upload content online, or hey, it's just one time. If I need to sleep with a few people to get that money in cash to help us out, all right, it's just one time. It's never just one time. It continues, and then when the person is not willing to do it anymore, then it gets more and more abusive and aggressive, and we see that control that's maintained. So going to the next slide, very quickly, just to highlight as that recruitment happens, where are we then seeing the people funneled to in Pennsylvania? We're seeing individuals then funneled to illicit massage and spa businesses for sex trafficking. We see it happening quite a bit out of homes and then hotels and motels. And then on the next slide, you're going to see for labor trafficking, the restaurant and food service, domestic work, agriculture. These are some primary areas for labor trafficking. And so as we look at this and our team assesses, okay, where are we seeing these trends? Where are a lot of people coming from? We're strategically trying to find ways in, okay, we want to partner restorative care and the legislative advocacy and the education that we do. So why don't we start educating some of these key people in some of these spheres? So naturally, we're seeing the hospitality industry is a pretty big one that shows up for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So Greenlight has been working with various hospitality groups throughout the state, and now we're getting out-of-state requests as well. We just recently did a big training for some St. Louis hospitality leaders, and we're writing a quarterly column for an International Festivals and Events Association magazine, and regularly meeting with them and helping with some of their annual conferences. And we're able to capture in that audience people that work for the NFL, that are doing work and coordinating events like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Some others are working for major casinos and hotels, for example, out in Vegas. And we're able to start planting the seeds in their minds of, hey, this could be happening at your events. This could be happening at your hotels and your motels. And are your people trained on this? Do you have policies in place to handle it? And you know what? And if you don't, let's help you. And let's brainstorm this together. And so, and we compare that then with, as we see legislation moving forward or not moving forward sometimes, which is the heartbreaking challenge of sometimes this line of work, we're able to almost get others to decide and activate before they even have to from a legal matter. And that's kind of some of that goal that we're able to do. And so moving forward, we'll go past these slides since we already hit these. I just want to end on just really summarizing, and you're going to hear more of this, the reality that many survivors, again, they're doing life around us. To give just another example, I noted at the very beginning, we were starting to see more cases at our church as Greenlight Operation was getting ready to launch. My husband and I were working with the young adult demographic in our young adult group, and regularly had about 50 to 100 young adults that would come to a gathering. And I'll never forget one young woman who we would see pretty regularly, and then sometimes we wouldn't, but that's kind of typical for the young adult group. They're relatively transient. But there was one night that we were talking about justice issues. And so I was sharing about my passion for human trafficking and some of what I was feeling called to do. And I remember this young woman then coming forward afterward, and she said, "You just explained my relationship." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "I think I'm being trafficked." And I asked her, I said, "Are you safe right now?" And she said, "No, my boyfriend, who's my trafficker, is right over there." Sure enough, there he was, coffee in hand, hanging out, talking to some of the other guys, looked completely normal, was blending in. I had a very small window of opportunity to connect with her and offer her some next steps, and it then ended up being a succession of some meetings with her. But as another survivor summarized it, they said, "No one came looking for me because I never went missing." And that's a reality for many survivors. And so on the next page, I'll leave the reporting to the task force. We can go ahead of all of that. Just some ways to get involved. And we can actually go to the next slide. Let's go one more over. There we go. The reality is tonight, all of you in this room know more about human trafficking than the average person. And my question to you is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? The worst thing that we can do is just hear this information, let it swirl around in our minds, and think, "Oh, wow, that was a bit of a tragic night. Sad story," and move on the next day. And I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, but a lot of us are guilty of that. We hear about a need, and we don't always respond. No, I'm not saying make your whole life about human trafficking, but what in our daily practices can we adjust? Are we consuming ethically? Are we having open conversations with loved ones? I have the privilege, we're in a church setting. Jesus very simply says we're to love our neighbors more than ourselves. Are we loving our neighbors? That simple act, we can create all these strategies and solutions and systems. That simple act of just loving others is going to be one of the most effective prevention tools that we can have. It's almost like Jesus knew something about what he was talking about. I know that we're celebrating the year of Jubilee in 2025, and Isaiah 61 is one that was referenced by Bishop Timothy, and we see that referenced again in Luke 4. And I would charge those of you in here who are devout Catholics and those who are followers of Jesus to consider that charge that is put in front of us, that we want to see beauty from ashes and set the captives free. But that requires us to be the hands and feet of Jesus. It requires us to act. And so as you consider, what is your role and how can you do that? Could you do it through volunteering? Maybe through giving? Combating a $236 billion criminal industry is not cheap. It takes a lot to undo what a trafficker has done to a person. But we firmly believe that those people are worth every single cent of that investment. And so would you consider even giving, whether that's your time, your finances, or attending even some events. And you can jump back a slide. We have our gala coming up in October. We'd love to meet and connect with you further. And then as we go to the very final slide, you'll see a QR code in our website listed there, and there you can fill out volunteer applications, learn more about our work, and continue learning about human trafficking. We have a lot of resources that are listed online, and want to be a resource as much as we can. As I mentioned, our home is just about 10 minutes down the road, and we have some office locations in the Camp Hill area as well that we're able to utilize, and we're available to answer any questions you may have. So I know we'll have Q&A later, so I will be done with my segment, but I just want to thank you. This is a major sacrifice of your time. Thank you for coming tonight and for pressing in a little bit more.
Thank you.
I'll grab that for you.
Megan and Ashley, do you have a slides you would like to show?